Hi everyone and welcome to your horoscope for the week of May the 9th, 2022. We have a really active and powerful sky playing out all throughout the week. There are some very action-oriented and dynamic aspects, yet perhaps this call to action, so to speak, is eclipsed in a very literal sense by the eclipse because at the very end of the week, so 15th of May or 16th of May, depending on where you are on the planet. So basically, on the 9th of May the 15th, we have a total lunar eclipse taking place in the sign of Scorpio, and that is a really powerful and highly transformative celestial event because on one hand it is a total lunar eclipse, which means the eclipse phenomenon is conjunct in a literal sense the nodes of the moon. So the moon being conjunct the south node in Scorpio, and the sun illuminating all of that from Taurus being conjunct the north node. And the eclipse phenomenon means a really powerful reset, which ultimately is a karmic one as well, not just a visual one. And since this is a total lunar eclipse, chances are, of course, depending on your specific region, you can actually see this celestial event take place in the sky physically. So that also adds a little bit to the mystery, to the karmic feeling of this event, because ultimately the sign of Scorpio, when activated so very powerfully, and not just by the sheer eclipse phenomenon as well, but I'm going to be speaking more about the astrological specific of the eclipse later on. But where I'm going with this is it's also activated astrologically by the two ruling planets of this sign, basically Pluto, which is retrograde, but Pluto just started its retrograde, so it is still very slow and very powerful, highly transformative. And Pluto does suggest, it already speaks about the power games that are going to be visible and at the same time reset at the time of this eclipse. Now, of course, the eclipse has the sphere of manifestation of usually 1 week before and a month after, but this is such a really powerful, intense eclipse that we might be feeling its effect even 2 and 3 months after it takes place, basically. But its peak time is without a shadow of doubt, this week and next week, so basically all of May, because the other planet which speaks to the eclipse directly is the ancient ruling planet of this sign, and that is Mars. Mars in an already scorpionic position, being in the third decan of the sign of Pisces. And Mars is the planet of action, Mars is the activator, Mars is when even karma, even fated events do quicken up, do hasten up, or sometimes they're actually instant. And this Mars is not alone in the sign of Pisces at the time of the eclipse. It is very close to Neptune. So basically, Mars in its raw, in its primal form, is more drowned, but it is Neptune who receives the activity, the intensity, the singularity of Mars, and that represents a really highly active and powerful and transformative Neptune. So it is also Neptune adding its full power onto this eclipse through a sextile along with Mars, and that is a really important astrological combination because it does suggest that fate is definitely going to be playing out here. Maybe not 100% in everyone's lives in the same intensity. Of course, there are going to be people out there who will feel this really strongly, for whom this will be a massive completion in life one way or another, not necessarily overjoyous and positive for everyone, because this is the domain of Scorpio, and this is a termination, this is a completion, this is a powerful purge. But at the same time, it can be a big massive reward, let's say symbolically, for other people, because Scorpio is also money, finances, when you get what you want, when you achieve success, when your sacrifices, compromises, and you displaying power, singularity, as in sticking to what you want, your ambitions, your desires. So this has to be rewarded in a certain way. So of course, for some people, this termination will represent getting what you want, and the purpose, the chase, the journey, the evolutionary path is terminated. It ends. It serves its purpose. So basically something else has to be continued if you wish, if you will. And perhaps this is also the message, the influence of Mars and Neptune. If you wish, if you agree, if you see the light at the end of the tunnel, if you're aligned with your dreams. Because if getting what you want simply terminates everything, as in the whole journey, and you do not wish to pursue anything further, well, that already is a powerful transformation, because you already alchemized the whole chapter, maybe a whole area of life, into a memory, into a lived experience. So that means that you, in that moment, become that much more powerful, wise, mature, experienced, so embodying the higher qualities of Scorpio. Because Scorpio, knowledge, information, like practical, let's say scientific, data, facts, etc. knowledge, well, is ultimately power, because you can do things with it. Or let's say the financial expression of Scorpio, money, Pluto in an erratic degree of Scorpio. Capricorn. So where I'm going with this, that Capricorn is much more money oriented even than Scorpio. Scorpio knows how to get the money, but it is ultimately Capricorn who holds it. And Scorpio's ruling planet, governing star, Pluto, in an erratic retrograde also, a Capricorn, that will mean money for a lot of people. Is it that you erase your debt? Is it that you fall greatly into debt, and that will lead you somewhere? Because this has to end something, So either way, our lives either have changed imminently, and this eclipse just reflects it to us. It just shows us that one normality is gone forever, and now, like it or not, ready or not, know it or not, we already have to live life with a very, very different modus operandi. Because the old one is non-functional in this new reality. So this is also a powerful wake-up call for all of us. Yet perhaps the icing on the cake, the cherry on top, is gonna be how this eclipse plays out on the world stage. Because individually, as I said, the sextile with Mars and Neptune and Pisces, and the other sextile, which is also a trine, because Mars and Neptune will sextile the Sun, but that means they will trine the Moon, and Pluto the opposite. Pluto will sextile the Moon and trine the Sun. So that is already, it visually creates a very powerful astrological configuration in the sky, which some astrologers call like a cradle, while other, depending on how we look at it, we can also see it as the opposite, the tower collapsing, or we can also see it as a trapeze. There is a lot of tension and shock here either way, because the cradle, well, there's an infant there who cannot move. So it needs to be taken care of. Or the opposite, when a tower collapses, when something falls to the ground, either way, it is a great change and transformation. And it will mean responsibility, but it also depends on the past a lot. because regardless of if it's a cradle, the child had to be created somehow, Scorpio, the Scorpionic way, or if it's like something collapsing, that had to be once built, the bricks had to be laid there. So either way, the problem here is that it's very, very intense. It will show us how we did and who it is that we were in the past, and how that reflected in our lives, in our everyday normality, our actions, our preferences, our choices, and everything that we loved, Neptune. But at the same time, it will also reflect what it is and who we are growing into the future, as in which kind of person, what kind of personality, what identity are we going to be generating and upholding that generation for ourselves, who it is that we are growing into. Even though this is a termination, yes, but any termination either gives some kind of fruits, a harvest, or it leaves a void. Either way, it can be a blessing. And this is what that Mars and Neptune and also the Pluto sextiles, respectively trines, speak to us about. Anything can be a blessing, anything can be useful, anything can give us power, as long as that is what we are focused on. That is our mindset, that is our even spiritual mindset, that is our psychological focus, our intent. We do have a lot of power, at least psychologically and spiritually, Pisces, Scorpio, so we need to use it. We can even make something with an eclipse, a total lunar eclipse in the sign of permanent transformation, Scorpio. So Scorpio, also rules death. And here I don't mean the physical death. When it touches something, when it changes something, that transformation is permanent. So it is that very powerful. And an eclipse in this sign, well, it is shocking, it is unsettling, it is sometimes even disbelief, especially on the world stage, because that is all the karmic sewage. That is all the inner filth of the whole species, of the collective, of society, coming onto the surface like a geyser, washing over. So of course we know that on the world stage is kind of vengeful. And I'm not the kind of person to bite my tongue when it is actually what it is. It's not going to be pretty collectively, no matter how I put it. It's gonna be ugly, because this is how it has to be. But this is where I'm going. Individually, it doesn't have to be. Because the species had certain actions and planted certain seeds of intention. This is also where historically the astrology is pretty much pointing back to the Second World War, when a lot of destruction and crimes, the most heinous crimes, were committed. And where were they buried? In Scorpio. That is under the carpet, that is the skeleton in the closet. And now this eclipse will activate that. So it activates the lock on the door, on the closet. So everything there will pop out, wash out. But individually it doesn't have to be the case, because that Pisces area where Mars and Neptune converse from, individually it can be full of good deeds, it can be full of compassion, it can be full of belief, it can be full of purity, it can be full of right choices, self-sacrifice, morality, integrity, kindness, embodying the Christ spirit. So if you know that that is what your closet is full of, have no worry. Because the occult, Scorpio, and everything that has to do with the metaphysical and paranormal, Scorpio, well, ultimately it will reward its own kind, especially when it has a moment of maximum power. And that maximum power is definitely going to be the 15th and the 16th of May, because on one hand, total eclipse in Scorpio, the veil between the worlds is very, very, very thin. But then again, Mars is the ruling planet, the ancient ruling planet of Scorpio, and before Pluto was discovered. Then there is Pluto. Both of these planets which represent power ultimately. Mars, more inner power, everything that depends on us, including physical power. Pluto, more power understood in a different way, like social power, influence, manipulation, that's also power. Or, attraction, whatever, anything that means power over people. And these two literal power players sextiling and respectively trining the stars of the eclipse, the sun and the moon. Now, if this wasn't enough, Saturn, the great malefic, squares the eclipse. So that also means that this is for real. This is gonna get real, and this is also ultimately a reality check and a T-square to Saturn, because an eclipse, a full moon, a completion. Saturn is the lord of completion. Saturn is the lord of karma. Saturn is also the lord of everything that this eclipse speaks of, because it has to show the truth, the eclipse, the moon, the full moon phenomenon. But at the same time, it also has to create a certain kind of justice, equilibrium, the reset of the eclipse, the darkness, the moment of karmic judgment. So basically, Saturn has to force the truth to reveal itself. On the world stage, it will be clear that it's about corruption and money and everything that has went on in the background, smoke and mirrors under the veil of secrecy. Yes, of course, we know that. But individually, sometimes that which is gonna be revealed ultimately can be more beautiful than you could ever imagine. Because sometimes we are blind to our own virtues, and when there is no filth inside of us, because we had so many purging energies these past couple of years, sometimes, last year, almost all of last year was a big purging. We also had another activity in Scorpio in November, also an eclipse. And that was a really, really strong Algol, the evil star, so to speak, activating kind of energy. So, of course, this next Scorpio eclipse is going to be very similar, because even the degrees where it takes place are very close. This eclipse takes place at 25 degrees of Scorpio, so that means the sun is 25 degrees of the sign of Taurus. Algol and Sedna, two very strong astrological power players, are very close to it. Yes, Sedna is a dwarf planet, but she needs 10,000 years, more than that, to make an orbit. And the slower the planet, the more powerful. The further it is away from the sun, the more powerful. Sedna is on top on both of these criteria. So that's a lot of, and Algol, a fixed star. That's without even needing to introduce who and what Algol is. It will pull that to the surface. A big world leader, any kind of secret popping to the surface, will wait and see. And this was just the introduction, because there is so much happening in the sky next week, apart from the eclipse, which is just at the very, very end. But because it is so powerful, the feeling of it will extend. It's even active now, to be totally honest with you. We feel that veil that is just covering all of us like a very thick and suffocating blanket of some kind of mysterious energy. We already are feeling that that's the eclipse. But apart from that, if we can detach from that, if that's even possible, we have a lot happening in the sky, and one of that is, at the very, very beginning of the week, we have a strong conversation between Pluto retrograde at 28 degrees of the sign of Capricorn, and a trine that it holds with Jupiter. Jupiter, an erratic degree of its ancient ruling sign of Pisces, just before it changes signs, just before it exits Pisces, it holds this really, really strong trine with Pluto. So this already amplifies the power of the transformation, the eclipse. And this is where it's not just the collective expression, because collectively we know that Pluto in Capricorn, and erratic, oil prices, fuel prices, energy prices, a lot of expenses. And this is where a lot of big companies, big corporations are in deep, deep trouble. And also, big world leaders and the leaders of big corporations act pretty erratically, unexpectedly. Pluto is already pulling their fears onto surface, if you know what I mean. So Pluto is readying everyone for the final blow in 2023, but this is still 2022, so there is still a certain discrete modus operandi to what Pluto is doing, if that makes sense. Because next year the discretion is gone. Next year it is gonna strike to the target. But anyway, this trine between Pluto and Jupiter amplifies all of this. It amplifies the power struggle. It amplifies the power games. Yes, for a lot of people this is a very fortunate energy, because Pluto amplifies their inner strength, their inner power. Everyone has this 28 degrees of Capricorn in their chart, in their sign. That means there is a concentration of power there, and this Jupiter will transform it, will make it very, very virtuous, very, very attractive, you will have this power in your hands. What you do with it, that is your choice, but this is a free blessing. And then on the 10th of May, Mercury finally goes into retrograde. This is where the second Mercury retrograde begins. So Mercury is going to go retrograde on May the 10th, and it will last until June the 2nd. And Mercury begins this retrograde in its home sign of Gemini, and it will slowly but surely retrograde back into Taurus, and then begin its forward movement to go back on its shadow path and finally go back to its home sign of Gemini, its daytime expression. Now, this isn't really the most vengeful and the most uncomfortable type of Mercury retrograde, but of course, depending on your personality, because, preferences, that is all about the sign of Gemini. Of course, it is Gemini, air sign, communication. And Gemini, inherits everything that Uranus, because Uranus does have a special connection with this part of the sky, Gemini. Not just because the third decan of Gemini is ruled by Uranus, but also because times are changing, things are evolving, certain expressions, certain symbols, certain rulerships that Uranus is passing on to its lower octave, Mercury. Well, that is integrated in the expression of Gemini. So that which is way too old-fashioned or way too normal, way too mundane to be ruled by Uranus or Aquarius, well, they are passed down to the other two air signs, Libra and Gemini, depending on the specifics, but more Gemini because the lower octave of Uranus is Mercury. So that basically a lot of the internet, that which was Uranus's speciality and domain, is already Gemini because times have changed. So where I'm going with this is, it might be not the best news for new purchases, signing new contracts, making new friends, but this is not necessarily true. It is very, very good for making new friends, but those friendships, those connections are not always what they seem at first. So Mercury retrograde will invite you to rediscover them. There is one impression and one promise when you meet them, the moment you meet them, and you will break apart that illusion and get to the truth of who that person is and why you met them and why this friendship is gonna work as you go through Mercury retrograde and even after, because Mercury will still have to leave shadow fully when we can consider the mercurial matter clear as daylight. Until it hasn't left shadow, there can still be, let's say, sparks of doubt and misunderstandings. So, regarding old friendships, well, this Mercury Gemini, the siblings, old friendships are definitely going to be put under the microscope and re-evaluated. But this is one of the most positive Mercury retrogrades because you're not necessarily re-evaluating those friendships, connections. Even if the friendship is not necessarily with a total stranger, it can be a family member. Some people's best friends are their cousins, family members, etc., etc. So, that's part of the deal, really. But you're putting all of this under the microscope because you want to harmonize it. You want to bring something even better to the table. You want to find new means how to inspire the other, to serve the other, not in a bad way, not to serve them physically, but to be used to them, to add value, laughter, joy, the highest Gemini expression to their lives. Yes, the mobile phone, the car, the internet, the computer, etc. will definitely break down, and there will be a lot of misinterpretations. Even physically, your friend or a person will tell you something and you can swear that you heard physically something totally different. But these can lead to the highest expression of Gemini: laughter, humor, being even better friends because of the misunderstanding, remembering the humorous part for years. How many times I'm a Gemini. How many times has it not happened to me that my friends remember that funny thing I said coincidentally or that misunderstanding for tens of years, and I hear it at every birthday, every special event. So that's the beauty of it. It depends what we do with it. And Gemini is a very, very good negotiator. Gemini is a very, very good merchant. Gemini has a lot of commercial tactics and know-how and is a very good informational and multimedia manager. And where I'm going with this is Mercury retrograde. Everything you know by now with redo, rethink, revise, whatever you can think of. Even re-things which might not even have to do with Mercury retrograde. At the end of a Mercury retrograde, we can even integrate those because it happened to us. Anyway, so everything that has to do with is blessed actually. So for example, if you're working on a big project, if you're working on your big book, your big course or whatever, yes, you can see it. Oh, I'm gonna be interrupted, I'm gonna be this and that, and it's not gonna work out. But you can also see it that, well, I better just delay things a little bit and write, and check it, rewrite that which I don't like. If there is a time when overthinking, let's say, or hair pick, splitting the hair into 4, into 10, into infinite, the Virgo and Gemini expressions of the energy I favored, well, that is a Mercury retrograde. When you want to correct something, when you want to make something even more perfect, beautify it, finishing touches, make sure that there is no errors, no typos, no this or that. This is the period. And that goes for friendships, that goes for contracts, that goes for a lot. But the specific of this Mercury retrograde season, we're not even allowed, and understand this more humorously, to take it personally, get upset, get stressed, complain, because this Saturn at this time is squaring the nodes of the moon. We are invited, on one hand, to take things slowly but meticulously, and we're also invited to revise everything and truly add the finishing touches, because what we're building is for our long-term futures. Let's say if you were the carpenter and you were building your bed, a bed which will be your bed for the next 20 years, you would do it to the perfection, to the maximum. And this is what the universe is telling us. And this Mercury retrograde telling us. How we make our beds is how we are going to lay in it for the next 18 years. Taurus North Node. It will be next year in 18 years. So we have to lay in our beds that we're making right now. So let's use this Mercury retrograde in the most constructive way. Like, let's say even if it blocks you, you wanna improve your friendship with X person because you see the value in it. And it doesn't go as you plan, but that person, because that person is not an idiot, will ultimately see the good intention in your gesture. You've done it. You've done it in a weird way, but maybe the effect, that person seeing how good intended you are, maybe that was the what you were truly seeking, really. So this is very, very powerful. We have a lot of guidance until the 2nd of June. There will be a lot of other celestial conversation and Mercury making connections to provide us with a lot of guidance and loving and caring guidance. This isn't necessarily the slave driving one like we had last year, the Saturn and Uranus square. That was heavy. That was the true slave driver. That was the universe and even the divine at its most strict, so to speak. Very, very strictness. Great, great strictness. But this year, there can be a lot of gentleness. And we can see this in the world playing out. There is war and disaster and destruction. And simultaneously, there is also relentless humanitarian action. Even if it's slightly manipulated. That doesn't matter, but there is. It exists, it's there. And another really, really powerful event simultaneously taking place is Jupiter finally changing signs, leaving that energetic position of Pisces that it has been grinding on. And that also means that the trine it had with Pluto ends, but it is like an outer sign trine still, because it's only a couple degrees apart. So even the energy of that trine changes, it becomes very, very fiery. Pluto loves fire. Pluto loves to play with fire.